1988, Bulletproof Software's Hank Rogers attends a convention to promote the game Go, which is billed as chess but harder. Nobody seemed to be interested in it, and the young lady he recruited to help sell it looks to be distracted with another game. Hank approaches the Tetris booth, and despite his doubts, he quickly becomes addicted to the game. Hank later visits Eddie, a bank manager. He informs Eddie about his Tetris obsession and how he is now the Tetris licensee for PC, game console, and arcade rights. Hank then explains Eddie about Tetris history, starting with its founder, Alexei Pajitnov. Alexei had previously worked as a programmer for the Russian government while also developing games on the side. Alexei was able to transform Tetris from a simple game to a colorful one with the assistance of certain co-workers, so increasing its popularity. 2 years later, Robert Stein of Andromeda Software discovered Tetris because he would travel around Europe collecting game properties on the cheap and reselling them in the United States. Stein would harass Alexei's superiors until they submitted the licensing request to a Lorg. Later, Stein would travel to London to meet with wealthy media magnate Robert Maxwell of Mirrorsoft and his snobbish son Kevin to negotiate an international licensing contract in exchange for royalties. Hank continues his story by informing Eddie that the day before, he traveled to Nintendo headquarters in Japan to meet with CEO Hiroshi Yamauchi. Hank demonstrates Tetris to Yamauchi, who is impressed, despite receiving a $500,000 buyout offer. Hank declines it in order to build a partnership with Yamauchi by convincing him that their collaboration is analogous to Mario and Luigi or Zelda and Link. Hank then requests a $3 million loan from Eddie for Nintendo cartridges and arcade consoles. Eddie accepts if Hank agrees to higher loan rates and the use of his home as collateral. Hank converses with his wife Akemi in his Tokyo flat. She is concerned about his deal until Hank points out that their children are so engrossed in Tetris that the home is silent. Maya, his eldest daughter, is particularly taken by it. Hank calls Kevin, who informs him that he and his father have already sold arcade rights to Sega in Japan. Hank becomes enraged and returns to Nintendo to speak with Yamauchi and request advance residuals. Yamauchi invites Hank to join him in Seattle for a meeting with his colleagues. Hank visits Seattle to meet with Nintendo President Minoru Arakawa and Vice President Howard Lincoln. They show him the Game Boy, the trendy new handheld console that will be released alongside Super Mario Land. But Hank convinces them that it should be paired with Tetris instead, and he promises to secure portable licensing rights. Hank then travels to London to meet with the Maxwells, who are already embroiled in a furious argument with Stein over not receiving his payment. Hank requests to purchase the handheld rights but receives no answer from the Maxwells. Following Hank and Stein's departure, Kevin challenges his father about money missing from employee retirement plans, but Maxwell dismisses the questions and focuses on purchasing Tetris. Hank and Stein appear to strike a deal for the handheld rights on their way out. Arakawa and Lincoln call Hank to inform him that Stein is selling handheld rights to Atari for $100,000 as retaliation for the Maxwells' failure to pay him, despite Arakawa and Lincoln's warnings about the perils of traveling to communist Russia. Hank decides to go to a Lorg and obtain the rights himself. When Hank arrives in Moscow, he meets Sasha, a young woman who becomes his translator. Despite her cautions that he could get in trouble for coming in without an invitation, she leads him to a Lorg. They meet with a Lorg president Nikolai Belaikov, and Hank proceeds to explain his company to him. Hank learns from Sasha's translations that a Lorg only licensed PC rights and not console or portable rights. Hank hands Belaikov a personal copy of Japanese Tetris, which he suspects is an illicit copy. Despite Belaikov's orders to leave, Hank persuades him to meet again to discuss the terms of the agreement. Hank is contacted by shady KGB agents on their way out of a Lorg and told to leave the country. Kevin arrives in Moscow and meets with Valentin Trifonov, a member of the Communist Party's Central Committee and the chief of the Department of Foreign Trade. Because of their links to Mikhail Gorbachev, the Maxwells believe they have a better chance of purchasing Tetris. The next day, Hank and Sasha return to a Lorg, where they first meet Alexei, as well as Trifonov and his soldiers. Trifonov accuses Hank of unlawful behavior, such as showing up with a fake tourist visa, and Alexei does not immediately trust Hank's motives. Belaikov informs them that the Tetris arcade rights were never sold to anyone. Stein and Kevin arrive separately to try to meet with Belaikov. while Hank examines the written contract and concludes that Stein stole arcade rights. Belikov renews Stein's deal for the handheld rights. Alexei then offers to drive Hank and Sasha home. Kevin meets with Trifonov once more after discovering that they were spying on his meeting with Belikov. Trifonov admits to Kevin that communism in Russia will expire soon, and he wants to make good on their agreement as well. Maxwell is bribing Trifonov behind Kevin's back to help secure Tetris. Hank pays a visit to Alexei's house that night and has supper with him and his wife Nina. While Nina initially believes Hank stole Tetris, he later demonstrates to them that he is truthful about his goals. Alexei then shows him the original Tetris game and lets Hank play it. They soon hear a knock on the door and, afraid for Hank's safety, Alexei and Nina hide him. Alexei tries to get Hank to go after realizing it's just a neighbor asking for salt, but Hank convinces him to go out with him so they can continue to talk. Alexei takes Hank to a club with other dissidents from the Soviet Union. They all celebrate and dance to The Final Countdown, and Hank begins to develop feelings for Alexei. Unfortunately, the KGB has been spying on Hank and photographing him, prompting them to track down his family and threaten Akam and the children at her workplace in order for Hank to return home. Other KGB goons approach Hank, assault him, and steal his trousers. Before Sasha arrives, he returns to his hotel room and finds it ransacked. She explains why the KGB is chasing him and attempts to persuade him to leave, even kissing him unexpectedly before Hank reminds her that he is married. Later, Trifonov appears to Alexei with his sons Dmitry and Peter, tacitly threatening Alexei with the same fate as his father. In the meantime, Hank phones Akemi and instructs her to contact his lawyers. Hank and Stein each return to Elorg on their own. Stein complains to Belikov about the new contract, but eventually agrees to sign it. Hank confronts Belikov about everything that has happened and attempts to strike a new contract for $25,000 in upfront royalties and 25 cents for every copy of the game sold. Because Hank is broke and desperate, he believes Tetris may sell up to 20 million copies, earning Belikov $5 million. Belikov then meets Trifonov outdoors, who informs him that Tetris will be transferred to Mirrorsoft. The two then meet with Kevin, with Belikov claiming that Mirrorsoft can have Tetris if $1 million is wired to them within a week. Belikov then speaks privately with Hank about making his own offer within a week and providing him with a letter of intent to sign. Alexei meets Hank and rides with him in a cab so that they are not followed. Alexei tells Hank about his father, who was a university professor who signed a letter of complaint for a colleague who was imprisoned for selling his book overseas, which damaged his father's career. He then reveals to Hank that Sasha is a KGB agent who has been deliberately targeting him because of his perceived threat, and they watch her conversing with Trifonov. Alexei then takes Hank to the airport. Hank fails to attend Maya's school recital after promising to do so. Meanwhile, Maxwell meets with Arakawa and Lincoln to ensure Mirrorsoft receives Tetris, and Trifonov instructs one of his men to assault Belikov in accordance with Maxwell's demands. Back at his flat, Hank receives a fax informing him that he has been dropped from the Tetris agreement, along with a menacing photo of Sasha kissing him that could be disclosed to his family. When Akemi and Maya arrive, Akemi chastises Hank for missing Maya's concert, but he is more concerned about losing the contract and everything they have, prompting Maya to rush to her room and cry. Belikov pays Alexei a visit at his flat. He informs Alexei that Tetris will be transferred to Mirrorsoft and that Belikov would be dismissed as CEO of Elorg unless Alexei can set things right. He gives Alexei a letter of intent to send to Hank at his workplace. At the same time, Kevin discovers his father destroying documents, and when he asks for the $1 million required to deliver to Elorg, Kevin claims they don't have it. Hank returns to Nintendo after receiving the letter to face Arakawa and Lincoln and show them the letter. Hank discovers that Atari has stolen Nintendo's patent and is selling Tetris cartridges. Hank claims that Stein and the Maxwells lied and that the letter expired the day before, implying that Atari has no rights to Tetris. Hank persuades Arakawa and Lincoln to accompany him to Moscow to finalize their agreement before the Maxwells do anything else. Alexei realizes that he has been sacked from his work and that individuals are repossessing his belongings. He also discovers Trifonov conversing with Dmitry and Peter, making further veiled threats to toss them from a ledge. Sasha discovers Trifonov trying to work things out in his favor against the interests of the country when he calls Maxwell to continue their transactions. Following that, Stein confronts the Maxwells by hitting Kevin in the face for going to Moscow and attempting to make the Elorg transaction behind his back, defrauding him of his salary. Maxwell sees the documents and decides to accompany Kevin to Moscow to directly speak with Gorbachev in order to work against Hank. When Hank returns, he rushes to visit Alexei, who refuses to see him because of everything he has sacrificed by working with Hank. Not far away, Trifonov and his henchmen learn about Hank's return and race to Ilorg. The Maxwells arrive at Ilorg first for their transaction until Hank, Arakawa, and Lincoln arrive. Maxwell instructs Belikov to sign until Hank realizes the Maxwells have no money to pay Ilorg. Belikov recognizes the lies and refuses to sign. Maxwell attempts to attack him, but Belikov responds with a well-deserved headbutt to the face. Belikov signs with Nintendo and instructs the trio to leave Moscow as soon as possible. After realizing they had lost the contract, Trifonov confronts Maxwell, revealing his dealings in front of Kevin and Sasha. Trifonov pursues Hank, Arakawa, and Lincoln, but Alexei arrives to pick them up and transport them to the airport. This results in a high-speed chase with KGB goons pursuing the four men. They get to the airport and board the first aircraft out. Trifonov believes they are on their way to Tokyo and boards the plane, only to discover they are on a different plane. Sasha arrives to apprehend Trifonov for treason. Hank returns to his Tokyo flat and builds a temporary stage for Maya to compensate for missing her concert. He apologizes in Japanese to her, and she performs the show for him while he watches with Akemi. He also hands her the $5 million check to Bulletproof Software. Later, Tetris is published on the Game Boy, which sells out twice in Japan before arriving in the United States. Gorbachev resigns, and borders across Europe are being opened. Hank delivers Alexei his own Game Boy. Alexei and his family eventually go to the United States, where they are met by the Rogers family. Hank and Alexei exchange warm embraces. The Tetris company was founded by Hank Rogers and Alexei Pajitnov. According to the closing sentence, Robert Stein continued to license games but never recovered from his Tetris setback. Robert Maxwell stole almost $900 million from pension funds and amassed over $5 billion in debt, causing his media empire to implode before his death under strange circumstances. Kevin was later arrested in connection with the theft, declared bankruptcy, and was acquitted of fraud. Hank appointed Maya as Tetris' new CEO in 2014. Tetris is still one of the most popular games of all time, having sold over 1 billion units. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos and give a like for channel growth.